With the new anime releasing on Netflix, Scott Pilgrim has been thrust to the forefront of my head where he's been living for about the past month. Please send help. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World came from the creative mind of Canadian cartoonist Brian Lee O'Malley, presumably drawing from his real-life interactions with Canadian folklore, as the comic series was also set in Toronto. You know, Canada seems to be referred to as a bootleg US, and I don't really get that. It gave us Scott Pilgrim, it has Moose, it has universal healthcare, it gave us Pilgrim. And after months of anticipation, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is wildly different to any of the other adaptations. While I'm a little disappointed it's not the fleshed out version of the novels that I expected it would be, the unpredictable swerves in story beats were crazily entertaining to watch. Lastly, this casting feels as perfect as it did 13 years ago, which interestingly enough was the last time Scott Pilgrim was this relevant. All this hubbub served to remind me that they actually re-released this thing back in 2021. Enter the DreamWorks smile, because oh shit, I get to play this tasty, scrumptious, nutritious beat 'em up all over again. I adore this game. Although an interesting footnote in gaming history, it was only available for 4 years before getting delisted. That got me thinking about the origins, how this all came to be. Seeing as the game was pushed hard by Universal, it was clearly something that had to coincide with the release date of the movie. They were betting hard on Scott Pilgrim being the next big thing. Unlike with other franchises though, there just seemed to be way more passion behind this. You have to remember that a lot of licensed games were allegedly slop, and they were allegedly trying to earn a quick buck. You've got to counter that with people who give a shit about the game they're making, and also some space to breathe new ideas. Luckily, the Scott Pilgrim game wasn't going to end up like so many, as it had O'Malley and even Edgar Wright working with the team. While they were tangled up with the process, a competent studio was still needed to develop and create what they had set out. So the people behind this game needed to understand that this wasn't going to be no fucking open season. Ladies and gentlemen, this could be open season 2. Now, who did Brian Lee O'Malley entrust with this task? Ubisoft. You might be thinking. Think again, you caveman. Ubisoft wasn't always like that. A lot of old Ubisoft games hold up to this day. And try to place yourself in 2010, before all the milking and stagnation began. Their main lineup was, in general, pretty well liked. But even back then, Ubisoft released heaps of casual mediocrity. Whether they were the publisher or the developer, it would be fair for you to assume Scott Pilgrim could have been another victim. And it probably could have been chopped up into little pieces then fed to you when you're just trying to hide from like a bunch of zombies and like you're just on episode 2. You don't think they're cannibals, but they are cannibals, and you've been eating Scott Pilgrim meat the entire time. Yeah. While I can't see an exact day for the beginning of this game's development, the movie idea was actually pitched pretty soon after the first volume in 2005. That's quite early, considering when it actually came to fruition. In the following years, ideas for the game must have started flowing around, as movie tie-ins were basically a guarantee for any action-adjacent title. Surely it would make sense to not begin making that in summer of 2009, precisely 1 year before the movie would come out, except that's pretty much the only time frame that's been repeatedly said. Yeah, all that in a f***ing year. Crazy doesn't even begin to touch it. So, what happened, Mr. Chengdu, huh? What happened, Monsieur Montreal? Oh, okay, you spilled the beans. Cool. Sorry for the rudeness. A lot of the information I'm about to stone cold miracle all over you is coming straight from a Silicon Era interview with Richard Sau, when Ubisoft director turned metaverse developer turned meta warrior? I don't... Basically, the Scott Pilgrim game started and... Oh my god, my chair is so goddamn creaky. Basically, the Scott Pilgrim game started and finished pre-production in Ubisoft Montreal, where in terms of full-scale development, 20% of the game was created. Apparently they only got around to finishing one level, Todd Ingram's, or rather they mostly finished it. But that 20% is more like 10% of what their original vision for the game was, as they had to keep cutting and cutting. Otherwise, it just would not have been fully made in time for the movie's release. Sometime around February of 2010 was when it was decided Scott Pilgrim needed to be sent over to another studio, as Montreal as a whole needed to focus on other things, like deciding whether it's French or Canadian. Luckily, Ubisoft Chengdu came to the rescue and quite literally saved the game. It would not have materialized in the way it did without them. The reason they were capable of doing this is largely because the Chengdu studio was, as Richard Sau puts it, soldiers. I thought they were game developers, but I suppose he would know more than me. In his own words, soldiers are not people who argue back and forth about the color blue, they are people who prefer it to turquoise and so on. He had only one condition, that 4 lead developers would have to come to China and lead in their various creative departments to make sure everything was on track. Because all the planning, the concepts and ideas had been finalized, they just needed someone to make it. It seems this changing of hands worked amazingly, seeing how the game ended up. But before it looked like this, it looked like this, possessing 2/4 of the bits. You can immediately tell this was pitched before Paul Robertson joined the team. Paul Robertson was the guy they needed so they could move it away from this and gradually turn it into this. He was contacted to head up Scott Pilgrim's overall artistic direction. And without even knowing who he is, his influence on the game splattered all over his art, like goddamn. It just has that look to it, you know? Now, close your eyes. Open them, you fool. Imagine if this game was just a realistic brawler with greasy, blurry 3D models of Michael Cera and Chris Evans doing roundhouse kicks and hopping through the air. Now, yeah, that might sound amazing, but just play along. That would have its own charm and its own novelty, but the game wouldn't be half as loved, or half as memorable as what we got in the finished product. Which, of course, isn't the finished product. You may remember that Wallace and Knives were DLC for the original game on PS3 and Xbox 360, and that they were planned from the start to be in the game on day one. But there's a ton more than just that. Originally, a Montreal stage was planned as DLC and would feature Clash at Demon Head. Among that, there are many pieces of cut content floating around the internet, like this Behance page that Stefan Behance posted for the game's 10th anniversary. In Frozen Suburbs, Crash and the boys were a damn sub-boss, and presumably right before you fight Matthew Patel, they were fully sprited. You could even see them in the stage. Roxy's level would have taken you through Ramona's house, just before you end up in her backyard. This is apparently something they really tried to keep in, but sadly had to let go of close to the end. And there's a lot more. I really do recommend you to go check it out if you're interested. Finding out about all that is like finally seeing puzzle pieces that have been missing all along. It's just genuinely so disappointing to see what Scott Pilgrim could have been if they had complete free reign and more than enough time. Now, from what I've gathered through all my research, a year is 12 months. 12 months? It's not that long. Sure, the game is a success story, but that's in spite of how rushed and seemingly unequipped the team was. Regardless, what we've got, what we can play today, is still super impressive, and it's 1000% worthy of your time. Prior to the past few weeks, it had been about 8 years since I had actually played the game, so you can imagine I was worried it would not be as fun as I remembered. And while I am still nostalgic for the game, truthfully, it holds up so well. Scott Pilgrim is a one of a kind, and along with Castle Crashers, it internally raised the bar for what I expect not just from beat-em-ups, but action games in general. First, everything about this game was heavily influenced by classic beat-em-ups, more particularly River City Ransom, which was also the main inspiration for the comic series. While Scott Pilgrim in general does take after the 8-bit era, this is more of a 16-bit game monstrously souped up and fed raw egg. Unlike most of the games from this generation, these visuals have aged like wine. What can I say? These graphics are f***ing great, just all around. Come here. Come here. Look at this cup. Everything has this super detailed, super crisp shading applied to, and overall has this robust, blocky look to it without feeling pandering. I also appreciate the effort they put into making the character animations as bouncy and dynamic as it is, you know? Things like that elevate the visuals and pour in some signature Scott Pilgrim charm. The little facial expressions and the way some of these characters move, adorable. It's a very cute game, yet it doesn't infect every moment with cuteness. Ubisoft knows when an enemy should feel threatening, not huggable. Although I will proclaim, Gideon is looking mighty tempting. No matter where you're looking on screen, you won't ever get bored looking at the same guys haul ass to haul your arse. Something I also like is the effort to populate the levels with NPCs in a way that feels tailored to the experience. It never quite feels lonely or empty because of that. Hell, sometimes looking at the background characters is entertainment on its own. What makes it even better is it's the graphic novel characters who've been shoved into every crevice. And that's merely one example of the detail that they dedicated themselves to here. The core game is basically a successor to River City Ransom, so of course, go ahead and pick shit up, throw shit out, ricochet shit around the world. Shit. What gives the combat its depth are the many different moves allocated to each character, as well as the assist everyone can call in. Starting out at level 1 means it's gonna be a while before the combat starts blending together like butter and flour or pineapple and oregano. It's also way more difficult than I remembered, man. This game can be brutal, especially at the start. You are gonna be retrying levels over and over. It really does force you to learn how to play the game, instead of blindly jumping into every fight and button mashing, and I love it. I can't get enough of how punchy these kicks are, or how kicky these punches are, or how good slamming into someone's trachea feels. I fucking love violence. This game employs a progression style which is, guess what, straight out of River City Ransom. Leveling up only gives you new moves, so pretty much all your power boosts are gonna be from the glorious lira that enemies and sometimes even objects drop. You need McChickens to increase your strength. Because food/bucks cost money, there's a chunk of grinding here, which while problematic for some, is a non-issue for me because the game is such a blast to play. I do wish there was more content to accommodate that, but you know, 1 year, 12 months, 1 year. Now, level design is what separates the meat from the wheat, however the phrase goes, and Scott Pilgrim goes a long way to make the various stages stand out from one another in terms of the things you interact with, into a different family of weapons, unique enemies, adding in a set piece. To top it off, you have a whole host of Mischievous X's personality injected all over their movesets, besides Lucas Lee, who just rolls around at the speed of sound and then f***ing evaporates. A lot of games out there are good, but they're not always fun. Don't get me wrong, they can be fun, but they're not fun. Scott Pilgrim is all about being as fun as possible, and I can't recall ever being bored in my playthrough. Just one little thing. I hate how long it takes to get up. It's my only real issue with the gameplay. I know that seems like a nitpick, but it totally fucks up the pacing and speed of the combat, and that cooldown should be cut in half. And yeah, I know it took way too long to mention Onaman of Gucci's music. This soundtrack has been stuck in my Spotify rotation for like the past month. It's crazy how every track manages to hit a different sound and stay fresh. All of these fellas are catchy, great tracks. However, Party Stronger, Leave the Past Behind, and Another Winter are the main standouts to me. Of all the songs, these are the ones that feel most unique to this game. The ones that embody the Scottish personality. These guys went all out with this game. A fucking movie tie-in soundtrack has no right to be this good. To the extent that I can't quite imagine this game without it. Now, imagine my surprise when it didn't really do that good critically. I'm not saying this game is without flaws, but I just can't see this game being anything lower than an 8 out of 10. The complete edition fared a bit better, but still. Some publications said, this game sucks because I suck. Other reviewers said, it's kinda dumb, there's no online multiplayer. Well, you're kinda dumb. No, that's a flaw, I understand. but it is a flaw that eventually got rectified alongside the Wallace DLC, which was included in this re-release among the new additions of absolutely nothing. I can empathize with the fact that the original game only got 12 goddamn smackaroonies, which sucks. That it still turned out this good is a sign of the insane talent that was on board, and maybe a sign of worker violations. It's just this 2021 re-release was a perfect opportunity. There was no compulsory deadline, the original developers are still very much around, something could have been done here, anything new. Some attempt to add more, to create some sort of ultimate edition. Perhaps a completed edition, if you may. Hell, adding this subtitle was probably half of what Engine Software were allowed to do. Speaking of which, it would have been nice if the physical wasn't the mythical anti-peasant 3000 edition. This shit is expensive, and that's cause limited run games were the only ones to do a physical. By that, I mean they made a single physical copy. Yeah. One for each country. Oh, whatever. I'm just happy that rather than being locked up in some French guy's Canadian nightstand, the Scott Pilgrim video game was set free on modern platforms and can be discovered by anybody. Scrolling the marketplace with my shiny Microsoft points and purchasing this game is what got me into checking the movie out, and later getting one of the greatest birthday gifts ever from my brother. I watched Scott Pilgrim like 6 times that summer. I could not get enough of it. The jokes, the action, God, the visual effects. Even 10 years later, I just don't get the temptation to rewatch something more than once. The whole franchise helped shape my taste in movies, video games, and music. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the movie, was unlike anything my tiny brain had ever seen up until that point. And Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the movie, the game, the Xbox 360 port is what paved the way for that. I find it interesting that anyone who's ever attached themselves to the Scott Pilgrim IP has only ever seemed passionate about understanding and being able to show what the appeal of the world is. But for that to be so consistent through all of the different adaptations of Scott Pilgrim is something special. Running through all these different mediums, the feature-length movie, a chiptune video game soundtrack, a 16-bit arcade side-scroller, that one short-form cartoon, a movie OST, which may as well be a rock album, and finally an anime. Producing all of that and somehow not even failing once. Unless you count that one tiny thing that did fail in, but like, you know, I don't think you should, because it doesn't really count. It cannot. I think it's mainly thanks to Brian Lee O'Malley's insistence on being involved in the creation process. It is his baby after all. Until they destroy all of that goodwill with something in the future. No, they wouldn't do that.